Before this story starts, I want you to know that Callum is already divorced. Keep that in mind because the woman standing in front of him only said 6 words, not seven, and it changed everything. They said hotel room, and I don't want to spoil you anything else. Let's start this story.
My late friend's wife whispered, "Can I sleep with you tonight?" I froze standing there with my bag in my hand, and what happened over the next 14 hours in that room took me 2 years to fully understand. I was 42. She was 46. I was standing in the lobby of a hotel in Knoxville, Tennessee, holding an overnight bag, staring at a woman I had known for nearly a decade, and I could not make my mouth produce a single word. Not because she had said something strange. Not because she had done something wrong. Because she had said the most reasonable thing in the world, in the most calm, unhurried voice I had ever heard, and my entire body had responded like someone had just cut the power to every system I had running. 7 words. That is all it was. 7 words, and I just stood there. Why pay for 2 separate rooms? Her name was Solene Hargrove, and 14 months before that moment, I had stood in a cemetery in Asheville and watched them lower her husband into the ground. My best friend of 11 years. Gone at 41 on a Tuesday night in February on a road I had driven 100 times myself. And here we were, in a hotel lobby in Knoxville. 1 room available, and Solene already holding the key card. Okay, let me back all the way up, because if I drop you in the middle of this without any context, none of it makes sense. And this story, this whole thing, it only makes sense if you understand what Dex was, what he meant, and why the fact that his wife was standing 2 feet away from me in that lobby asking that question was the most complicated moment I had experienced since the night I got that phone call. My name is Callum Reeves. I was 42 when all of this happened. I grew up in a small town outside Roanoke, Virginia. Middle of nowhere. Nothing remarkable about me. I am the kind of person who shows up 7 minutes early to everything and still somehow feels like he is in the wrong place. I second-guess emails I have written to people I have known for years. I once sat in a parking lot outside a new barbershop for 11 minutes working up the nerve to walk in, and then I drove home and cut my own hair badly. That is the kind of person I am. I know it. I accepted it a long time ago. Dex Hargrove was not that kind of person. Dex was the kind of man who made everything feel possible without trying to. Not because he was loud or flashy. He was not. He was actually pretty quiet when you first met him. But there was something underneath the quiet. This absolute certainty about who he was and what he was doing in the world. Like he had read the instructions for being a person and actually followed them, and the rest of us were just sort of winging it. We met at a work conference in Charlotte 11 years ago. I was in urban planning. He was in architecture. We ended up at the same table at the same terrible group dinner on the first night, the kind where everyone is pretending to be interested in each other's business cards, and within about 40 minutes we had quietly agreed that the event was a waste of both our times, snuck out the side door, found a diner 3 blocks away, and talked until midnight about everything except work. That was Dex. By the end of that trip, we had exchanged numbers. By the end of that month, we had driven 2 hours to watch a college basketball game together just because we both happened to be free on the same Saturday. By the end of that year, he was the person I called when anything actually mattered. He married Solene about 4 years into our friendship. I was at the wedding. Not in the wedding party, but at it, close enough to see her face when she saw him waiting at the end of the aisle. And the thing I remember most about that moment was not the dress or the flowers or any of the things you are supposed to remember. It was Dex's face. The way he looked at her like she was the most obvious answer to a question he had stopped trying to solve. Solene was 46 and brilliant. Quietly, completely, almost inconveniently brilliant. She had built her architecture firm from one rented desk in a shared office space into something real, something that people in the industry actually respected, and she had done it mostly without making a fuss about it. She was not warm in the obvious way. She was not the person who immediately makes you feel comfortable at a party. She was the person who, 6 months later, you realize has remembered every single thing you ever told her. That kind of person. Through Dex, I had sat across from her at enough dinner tables and enough holidays and enough ordinary Tuesday evenings to know her in the quiet way. Not close. Not the way Dex and I were close. But real. Grounded. The kind of knowing that does not require constant maintenance because the foundation is already solid. And then Dex was gone. Route 9. Outside Asheville. February. A Tuesday night. The other driver ran a red light at 50 miles an hour. Dex never saw it coming. The paramedics said it was immediate, which I have spent 14 months deciding whether or not makes it better. I still do not have an answer. The phone call came at 11:42 p.m. I know that because I looked at the clock when my phone rang and thought, nobody calls at this hour unless something is broken. And something was broken. The biggest, most irreplaceable thing. The months after that were exactly as hard as you would expect and then somehow harder than that. Grief does not follow a schedule. It does not respect the timelines you try to put around it. I had my version of it and Solene had hers, and we checked in on each other the way people do when they have lost the same person. A message every few weeks. A call here and there. Nothing that demanded too much because neither of us had much to spare. Slowly, over about a year, the calls got a little easier. A little more like talking and a little less like surviving. About 4 months ago, she reached out about a regional architecture and urban planning conference in Knoxville. She had a client presentation scheduled during the conference weekend, a firm she had been courting for almost 8 months, and she wanted a second perspective on the strategy side of the pitch. She knew my background. She said she trusted my thinking. She asked if I would be willing to come along. I said yes. Quickly. More quickly than I usually said yes to anything. I told myself it was because the conference was professionally relevant, which was partially true. I did not examine the other part too closely. We drove separately to Knoxville. The plan was simple. 2 rooms at the Alderton Hotel, 2 days, the presentation on Saturday morning, back home by Sunday evening. Clean, professional, logistically straightforward. That was the plan. What actually happened was that I arrived at the Alderton Hotel on a Friday evening in October, walked up to the front desk with my overnight bag on my shoulder, and the receptionist looked at me with the specific expression of someone who is about to deliver bad news they have already delivered several times that day. A statewide planning summit had swept through the city that weekend. Every hotel room within 30 minutes of downtown was completely booked. The Alderton was full. Completely, totally, not a single room full. There had been one last-minute cancellation 30 minutes before I walked in. 1 room. A king suite on the 11th floor. 1 large bed. Pull-out sofa. That was it. That was all there was. I was still processing this when the lobby doors opened behind me and Solene walked in. She had driven up from Asheville. She looked, as she always looked, like someone who had their life organized in a way that mine was not. Coat pressed. Bag over one shoulder. Moving with that particular efficiency she carried everywhere. Not rushed, just precise, like she allocated exactly the right amount of energy to every single thing she did and never wasted any. She came and stood beside me at the desk. I explained the situation. The receptionist explained it again. Solene listened to all of it without changing her expression. Then she looked at the receptionist, then at me, and she said it. Quiet, unhurried, like she was reading a number off a spreadsheet. Why pay for 2 separate rooms? And there it was. The lobby was not loud. There were maybe 4 other people in it. The receptionist had gone very still in the way people go still when they realize they have accidentally walked into someone else's moment. I could hear the ventilation system above the desk. I could hear a cart rolling somewhere behind the far wall. I could not hear a single coherent thought in my own head. Because logically, she was right. Of course she was right. It was practical. It was reasonable. It was the obvious solution to a logistical problem. We were adults. We had known each other for nearly a decade. We had sat across from each other at Christmas dinners and conference tables and hospital waiting rooms. 1 hotel room with a pull-out sofa was not, objectively, a catastrophe. But the part of me that had spent 2 years very carefully keeping certain thoughts in a drawer that I did not open was suddenly not so careful anymore. She picked up the key card from the desk, tucked it into the pocket of her coat, looked at me with an expression that said the decision had been made and the only remaining question was whether I was going to stand in this lobby indefinitely or come upstairs. The presentation is at 8 tomorrow, she said. Let's not complicate a simple night. And she walked toward the elevator. I stood there for 4 full seconds, bag in hand, receptionist pretending to look at her screen, the ventilation still humming. Then I picked up my bag and I followed her. Because here is the thing about Solene Hargrove. When she decided something, there was a kind of gravity to it. Not demanding, not forceful, just settled. Like the conclusion had already been reached and the universe had simply not caught up yet. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in and held them with one hand and looked back at me with that calm, unhurried patience. I stepped in. The doors closed. I looked at my reflection in the brushed silver panels across from me. A slightly stunned man holding an overnight bag, standing next to his late best friend's wife, going up to a hotel room he had not planned on sharing. And somewhere in the back of my mind, very quietly, a voice said, "Callum, you have absolutely no idea what this next 14 hours is going to do to you." That voice was right. I just did not know yet in which direction. The room on the 11th floor was the kind of room that makes you feel, briefly, like you are living a slightly better version of your own life. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Tennessee River. The last of the October light was sitting on the water like something poured out slowly, amber and deep and wide. The city was going from its daytime self into its evening self, that particular hour where everything softens a little and slows down and you could almost convince yourself the hard parts are somewhere else tonight. It was a beautiful room. It was also, without any question, one room. Soline set her bag down by the desk and had her laptop open before she had fully removed her coat. I noticed that immediately. It was something Dex had described to me more than once, half laughing, half genuinely awed. She works like the day has a leak in it, he used to say. Like she's always racing something only she can see. I put my bag near the sofa and did not say anything because I did not know what to say. The sofa was long and looked reasonably comfortable, and I had already decided, without needing to discuss it, that that was where I was sleeping. She looked over from the desk. "You take the bed," she said. Just like that. "No preamble. I'm not taking the bed. You need to be sharp tomorrow. So do you. You're the one giving the presentation." She turned fully around to look at me. "We're both giving the presentation, Callum. That small correction. We're both. Not I'm presenting and you're supporting. Not my presentation, your assistance. Both. Equal." Like it had never occurred to her to frame it any other way. I put my bag down near the sofa and stopped arguing. Room service came at 8:30. We had ordered separately, looked at the menus at the same time, and somehow ended up ordering the same thing, which neither of us commented on. We ate at the small table near the window with the Knoxville skyline doing its quiet evening thing outside the glass. And somewhere around the second half of the meal, the strangeness of the situation started to dissolve. Not because anything was resolved. Just because ordinary things, eating, talking, looking at the same view, have a way of making unusual circumstances feel less unusual over time. By 9 we were on opposite ends of the sofa with her laptop open between us, going through the presentation deck slide by slide, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We worked well together. I had not expected that, or maybe I had and was pretending I hadn't. She caught a logic problem in my market analysis section that would have made the whole framework look shaky under the wrong question. I found a pacing issue in her closing sequence, the way the final numbers landed too abruptly after all the brand narrative, and it would have lost the room right when she needed the room most. We fixed things quietly without making a production of it. At one point we both reached for the same pen at the same moment. Her hand and my hand, arriving at the same object at the same time, touching for exactly half a second before we both pulled back. She picked it up and handed it to me without a word and without making eye contact. I did not look at her face when she did it. I looked at the laptop screen and focused very hard on the slide in front of me. We talked about the client. We talked about the strategy. And then, somewhere around the 7th slide, we started talking about other things. The way you do when the work is going well and the room is quiet and there is nothing demanding your attention and you realize you are actually comfortable. She mentioned a trip she and Dex had taken to New Mexico about 3 years ago. A long weekend, just the two of them, completely unplanned, pulled off a highway exit on a Friday afternoon because Dex had pointed at a sign and said, "Let's." She described the way he had narrated the entire drive through the desert like a nature documentary, completely deadpan, completely committed, for almost 2 hours. I started laughing before she finished the story because I could hear his voice doing it perfectly. And then her laugh came. "I want to be precise about this. Soline had a particular laugh that she did not deploy often. Most of the time she smiled, a real smile but a contained one. But when something genuinely got her, when something landed in the exact right place, she laughed in this way that was completely unguarded. Open. Like she had temporarily forgotten to manage it. I had heard that laugh maybe 5 or 6 times in 10 years. Surprised me every single time. And sitting on that sofa in that hotel room in Knoxville, I heard it, and something in my chest did something I did not immediately know what to do with. I looked back at the laptop screen. Very quickly. We wrapped up the review around 10. She moved to the desk to answer emails. I stretched out on the sofa with my notes and my phone and stared at the ceiling for a while, pretending to read something. The room went quiet. Just the sound of her typing and the low, steady hum of the city 12 floors below the glass. It was the kind of quiet that is not uncomfortable. The kind that two people only reach together after years of accumulated time in each other's company. Then her phone lit up on the desk beside her keyboard. She looked at it. One glance. And something in the line of her shoulders changed. Not dramatically. Just a small shift. The kind you only catch if you have been paying attention to someone for a very long time. She declined the call. Set the phone face down. A few seconds passed. She did not go back to typing. She just sat there looking at the dark screen. I did not ask. I watched, quietly, and waited. She sat like that for almost a full minute. And for the first time since I had known her, since all those dinners and all those ordinary evenings and all those hard months after February, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. Nothing to do with the presentation or the client or the schedule. A different kind of tired. The kind that comes from carrying something for a very long time. Then, without turning around, without any particular warning, she said something that made the room feel entirely different. Do you ever wonder if the people who stayed close to you did it because they wanted you, or because they did not want to lose access to someone they already lost? I let that sit for a moment, because she was not asking abstractly. She was not making conversation. She was asking because she had been sitting with something real, and the late hour and the quiet room and the strange situation we had somehow landed ourselves in had made the question come out before she could decide whether to say it. And I realized, sitting there on that sofa in Knoxville with the city humming below us, that whatever this trip was, whatever the next 14 hours became, something in it had already turned towards something true. I just did not know yet how far it was going to go. I want to tell you something I have never admitted out loud to anyone. The morning we walked into that conference room, I almost told her I could not do it. Not the presentation. Not the pitch. I almost told her that I was not the right person for this. That she needed someone with more polish, more certainty, more of whatever it is that makes a person look at a table full of serious strangers and feel ready instead of terrified. I did not say it, but I came close. And the reason I did not say it is because the night before, after all the work was done and the quiet had settled and we had both said things that had no easy names, she had looked at me across that hotel room and said something I was not prepared for. She told me about Dex. Not a story I had not heard. Not a memory. She told me something specific about the last 6 months before he died. She told me that he had talked about me, often. That in the final stretch of his life, when he was working too hard and sleeping too little and starting to feel the edges of something he could not name yet, the person he talked about most, the person he said he trusted most completely in the world outside of her, was me. I did not know that. I had had no idea. She said he used to tell her, "Callum is the most honest person I know because he is too anxious to lie. He means every single thing he says because he does not have the bandwidth to say things he does not mean." I sat with that for a long time. The room was very quiet. And then she said, "So when I tell you tomorrow that I trust you in that room, I need you to understand that I am not just saying it to be kind. I am saying it because Dex knew it first, and Dex was never wrong about people." I did not sleep much after that. I lay on that sofa in the dark, the city below the glass going about its late-night business, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about 11 years of friendship and what it means when someone is gone but still somehow managing to say the right thing at the right moment. The alarm went off at 6:15. She was already at the desk. Same clothes from the night before. Second coffee going cold beside her keyboard. A room service tray on the end of the sofa with 2 cups on it. One clearly meant for me, already poured, already waiting. She had ordered it before I was awake. She had been sitting there, working, and had thought about my coffee while I was still unconscious. I sat up. "Did you sleep?" "Enough," she said, which I understood immediately meant no. We did not talk about the night before. Not the question she had asked, not what I had said in response, not the things that had come out in the dark that neither of us had planned on saying. We just moved into the morning the way you move into a morning when there is something important at the end of it. At 6:45, we opened the presentation file for a final check. That is when everything collapsed. The file would not open. Application error. We tried the backup. Same thing. The cloud copy loaded on the third attempt, and when it finally opened, what we were looking at was nothing like what we had built. The formatting had completely disintegrated. Data tables were sitting in the wrong frames. The color scheme had reset to something that looked like it had been chosen by someone who had never seen the client's brand. The entire section that contained our closing argument, the part we had spent the most time on the night before, was simply gone. Vanished. As if it had never existed. We both stared at the screen. She looked at her watch. 19 minutes before we need to leave. I know. Prescott Vane's assistant confirmed they're arriving early. I know. She breathed out once, slow and controlled, the kind of exhale that means a person has already made a decision and is simply preparing their body to execute it. Then she pulled the laptop toward her. "Here is what we do," she said. "I rebuild the financial section from memory. I know those numbers well enough. You open the pitch verbally. No slides. No visuals. Just take them through the strategy the way you would explain it to someone intelligent who has never heard it before." I looked at her. "You want me to stand up in front of Prescott Vane and two of his senior partners with no deck and no preparation and open a pitch for a contract that your firm has been building toward for 8 months. She turned from the screen and looked at me directly. "Callum." She said my name in a specific way. Not sharp, not impatient, just precise. The way you say someone's name when you need them to stop performing anxiety and start listening to you. "I have watched you explain complicated things to difficult people in high-pressure situations more times than I can count. I have watched you find the right word in rooms where everyone else has run out of words. You are better at this than the version of yourself you have decided to believe in, and I would not put you in front of this table if I did not know with complete certainty that you can hold it." Something about that landed differently than encouragement usually lands. It was not cheerful. It was not a pep talk. It was a statement of something she had already observed, already cataloged, already decided was true. Like she was not trying to convince me of anything. Like she was simply correcting a factual error I had been walking around with. I picked up my notepad. We split the work without another word. 20 minutes of the kind of focus that only happens when two people trust each other completely and the clock is real and the stakes are real and there is no room for anything except the work. She rebuilt slides. I built the opening narrative in shorthand on hotel stationery. Writing fast, not overthinking, trusting that what I knew was already in there and just needed a shape. We walked out of the Alderton at 7:20 with our bags and a presentation that was half rebuilt and completely untested. In the elevator going down, she looked straight at the silver doors. "You are going to be fine in that room," she said. "You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it." The conference center was 6 blocks from the hotel. We walked. October morning in Knoxville, cool and bright, the kind of air that sharpens things. Neither of us talked much on the walk. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have already said what needed to be said and are now simply moving toward what comes next. Prescott Vane was already seated when we arrived. Not just early, settled. He and two of his senior partners were at the conference table with printed agendas and coffee cups and the particular energy of people who formed quiet opinions about rooms before anyone else walked into them. Vane himself was in his late 50s, silver-haired, precise in the way that meant he did not waste words, did not waste time, and did not extend patience to people who wasted his. His handshake told you he was measuring you from the first second. The number he was assigning you would be revised, possibly, depending on what happened next. Solene handled the introductions without a seam. A few easy words with the second partner about the morning. A brief, genuine acknowledgement of how long this conversation had been building. And then, with a look so brief no one else in the room registered it, she handed the floor to me. I started talking. No slide on the screen. No visual anchor behind me. Just my voice and the notes I had written on folded hotel stationery at 7 in the morning, and the strategy one had spent months building that existed completely and entirely in my own head. The first 90 seconds were the hardest thing I have done professionally in my life. Vane's silence in particular had a quality to it. Not hostile. Not bored. The kind of silence that collects information without giving any back. The kind that waits to see what you are actually made of when nothing is going right. And then something happened that I cannot fully explain. I stopped thinking about the room. I stopped thinking about Vane and his silence and his measuring handshake and the missing slides behind me. I started thinking about the work itself. About the specific structural gaps in the client's current market position. About why the repositioning we were recommending was not a cosmetic adjustment but a genuine correction to something that was quietly costing them trust in their audience. About the specific language shifts we were proposing, and why every single one of them came directly from how their customers actually talked about them, not how the company wished their customers talked about them. I talked about that, clearly, specifically, without rushing. Nobody interrupted. 12 minutes in, at a natural pause I had not planned but somehow felt, Solene stepped in and moved directly into the financial projections on her rebuilt tablet slides, presenting the numbers with the kind of precision that made the room lean forward instead of back. She fielded a sharp question from the second partner about 3-year risk modeling without blinking. And then she referenced exactly and specifically a detail from a conversation she and I had had the night before on that hotel sofa. A detail that had never made it into any version of the file. She had held it in her head all night and placed it exactly where it needed to go. I nearly lost my page watching her do it. The meeting ran close to 2 hours. There were questions that could have been traps and became genuine conversations instead. There were moments where I felt the room shifting, not away from us, but toward something. By the time Vane set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, the room had that particular feeling of something already decided. That strategic framework, he said, looking at me directly, is exactly the kind of thinking my board has been waiting for someone to put in front of them. I started to say something deflecting, something modest and careful, the way I usually handled moments like this, because moments like this had always made me slightly uncomfortable, like there was a mistake somewhere that was about to be discovered. Solene spoke before I could get the words out. Callum built that framework, she said, clearly, without any softening around it. He has been developing it for 2 months. I brought him to this meeting because I trust his thinking above anyone else I know in this field. The presentation was a tool. The thinking is entirely his. Vane looked at me with a revised expression. Not dramatically different. Just the specific way a person's face adjusts when someone has moved from one category to a different one in their mind. Good work, he said. We walked out of that building 40 minutes later with a signed letter of intent and 2 cups of coffee from a cart near the entrance. A verbal agreement on a contract that Solene's firm had been building toward for 8 months. Neither of us said a word for almost a full city block. The kind of silence that follows something that actually went the way it was supposed to go. The kind you do not want to break because breaking it might make it less real. Then, because we had 90 minutes before her train and the morning was wide open, we found a bench near Market Square and sat with our coffee in the October light and just existed there for a minute. And that is when she told me the thing that stopped everything. She told me the board had wanted her to let me go. Early in my time at the firm I had worked with Dex on a few projects before his death, and had then continued on with Solene's firm afterward, not as a full employee but as a contracted strategist, regular enough to be in the room for most things that mattered. A senior advisor, she said, had made the case to the board that I hesitated too much in front of clients. That it read as a lack of confidence the firm could not afford to be associated with. I sat very still. She looked at her coffee cup and not at me. I told them, she said, that hesitation in uncertain situations is not a weakness. It is care. It is what separates someone who thinks from someone who performs. And I was not going to let the firm discard someone's real potential just because it had not yet become the kind of performance that looks good in a first impression. There had been a door I had never known was open, and she had stood in front of it, quietly, without telling me, without ever once using it as leverage or holding it over me, and she had kept it closed. I did not know what to say. I tried to thank her properly, the way the moment deserved, and the words came out smaller than I meant them to. She shook her head slightly. "Dex would have done it if I hadn't," she said. "He just wasn't there to do it." And that was the moment something shifted in me that I have been trying to find the right words for ever since. Not a dramatic moment. Not a realization that arrived with any particular sound. Just a quiet, private understanding that something I had been pretending was one thing was actually something else entirely. And that the pretending had been going on for longer than I had been willing to admit to myself. Her train was boarding in 20 minutes. We packed up our things. I held the door of the cafe open as we left. She walked through it. We moved through the station concourse side by side, and somewhere between the cafe and the platform our arms brushed together and neither of us moved away. It lasted maybe 4 steps, and I noticed it for the entire train ride home. 6 months after Knoxville, Soline's firm won the Caldwell-Renner Civic Development contract. I need you to understand what that meant. This was not a good quarter. This was not a nice account. Caldwell-Renner was the kind of contract that comes along once in the life of a firm and either breaks it or defines it. 3 project cycles. 2 states. Enough budget to restructure the entire team, hire people she had been wanting to hire for years, and push the firm into markets she had been building towards since before Dex died. The confirmation came through on a Wednesday afternoon, and she called me before she called anyone else. I drove to Asheville that weekend. We had dinner at a small restaurant on Lexington Avenue that Dex had loved. The kind of place with no reservations and always a line and food that makes you understand why people wait. We sat across from each other for 3 hours. Talked about the contract, about what came next, about the team she was building, about Dex, about all of it the way we could now, with warmth instead of weight. Walking back to her car after dinner, she told me she had stopped answering the calls from people who had drifted away in the hard months and reappeared after the Caldwell announcement. She said it without drama, just as a fact she had finally gotten comfortable enough to state out loud. I told her I thought that was one of the braver things I had heard someone say in a long time. She said, "It did not feel brave. It just felt honest." Finally. And I understood that. 3 months after that dinner, 2 things happened in the same week. The first was that Soline filed for divorce. I want to be careful how I say this. I want to be accurate. After Dex died, there had been someone else. Not for long. Not anything she had ever hidden from the people in her life who needed to know. A relationship that had formed in the fog of grief and had slowly clarified into something that was not right, and both people had known it for a while before anyone said it out loud. She told me about it simply, over the phone one evening, with the same directness she brought to everything. No performance. No apology for something that required none. Just the facts, stated plainly, by a person who did not believe in leaving things ambiguous. The papers were filed. It was over. She was, in the clearest sense, starting from a clean place. The second thing that happened that week was that I received a formal job offer from a planning consultancy in Charleston. Senior strategist. Real authority over a team. Significant salary. The kind of opportunity that does not come back around if you let it go. I spent a week going back and forth. Made lists. Deleted the lists. Made them again. And eventually I stopped pretending the decision was actually about the job. I drove to Asheville on a Saturday afternoon. She was home. We sat at her kitchen table with coffee, and I told her about the offer, all of it, the terms, the timing, the professional logic of it, and then I told her the part underneath that, the part one had been carrying since a hotel elevator in Knoxville closed its doors and I found my own reflection in the brushed silver panels staring back at me. I told her she was the first person I wanted to talk to when anything happened. The first face I looked for when I walked into any room we were both in. That somewhere in the 14 months since I had lost my best friend, she had become something I did not have a clean word for yet. And that I had gotten very tired of being careful with the most important thing I knew. The kitchen was quiet. She looked at me from across the table. And I need you to understand that I was not sure. I had gone back and forth on whether saying this was the right thing or the most self-indulgent, poorly timed thing I had ever done. She was just through something hard. She was just at the beginning of something new. And here I was, sitting at her kitchen table, asking her to add something else to that. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Dex would have figured this out about us, she said. Long before either of us did. I laughed. Not because it was funny exactly, because it was so completely, obviously true that the only response was laughter. And then she smiled. The real one, the one I had been cataloging since that hotel sofa in Knoxville, the open, unguarded one that she did not show to most people and did not know I had been memorizing. We did not rush anything after that. That is important to say. She had things to work through and I had things to understand about myself, and we moved into whatever this was the same way we moved into everything together, carefully, honestly, without pretending to be further along than we actually were. But it was real. It was grounded in something real. That much was clear. 2 years later, on a warm October evening in Knoxville, we went back. Not for work. Not for a conference or a client or anything professional. Just for a weekend. Just for the two of us. She had mentioned once, months after things between us had become what they became, that she loved that city in the fall. That the light in October there was something she had never seen anywhere else. Gold and wide and unhurried. We had dinner at a small restaurant near the river and walked along the waterfront afterward. The Tennessee was doing its slow, dark, October thing below us, catching the reflection of the city lights in long, shifting lines. The air was the same cool, sharp air it had been 2 years earlier when we had walked out of that conference center with a signed letter of intent and 2 cups of coffee and a silence neither of us wanted to break. I stopped walking. She turned around. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the small box I had been carrying all evening, warm from being held close all day, and I looked at the woman who had been my best friend's wife and then his widow and then somehow, through all of it, mine. I told her that I had been certain about this for longer than I had admitted even to myself. I told her she was the most honestly extraordinary person I had ever known. Not because of what she had built or what she had accomplished, though all of that was real and all of it mattered, but because of what she had done quietly, consistently, without an audience, in the moments where no one would have blamed her for doing less. I told her she had shown me, without ever explaining it, what it actually looks like to trust someone. What it costs. What it gives back. I opened the box. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. 3 seconds. Then she said yes. Quietly. Completely. The way she did everything that actually mattered, with nothing held back and nothing performed. I stood up. She stepped forward. And I held her there on that riverbank while Knoxville carried on around us, completely unaware of what had just been decided in its midst. Later, walking back through the warm October night, her arm through mine, she said quietly that it started because of a hotel lobby and a question about room rates. I told her she was being practical. She stopped walking and looked up at me. The corner of her mouth moved in the way I had first noticed on a sofa in that hotel room 2 years ago and had never stopped noticing since. I knew exactly what I was doing, she said, and I believed her. Standing there in the October dark, beside the river, 2 years and 1,000 quiet moments after 7 words in a hotel lobby in Knoxville had redirected the rest of my life. I believed her completely. If you made it this far with me, through all of it, Knoxville and the broken presentation and the kitchen table and the riverbank, I just want to say thank you. Genuinely. Because this is not a story I tell easily. And telling it to you, to whoever is on the other side of this right now, means something. If these kinds of stories are what you are here for, the real ones, the messy, honest, hard-to-explain ones, then stay close. Subscribe if you want more. I will keep telling them as long as you want to hear them. And one last thing.
Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. Drop a comment, tell me where in the world you were watching from, and if you have a real story that stayed with you, share it below in the comments. I will turn it into a next video.